Hello everyone, it's Kevin from kjdElectronics, and welcome back to another one-stop programming video for absolute beginners on Python. In the last video, I introduced functions and variables. In this video, we're going to go more in depth with different types of functions and how they can be used in a more practical way other than just hello world and my first variable. We're going to get right to work here, and we're going to clear away everything that we had before except for a couple lines. So we're going to get rid of these last two lines. We're going to keep the call to main. We're going to get rid of my first variable, and we're going to get rid of our hello world function. And we're also going to clear out our main function. So we're going to add some lines up top, and we're going to define a new function called add. So if you recall, we're going to type def, the name of our function, which is add. And in the last video, we went over function arguments, but we only ever had functions that accepted one argument. You can actually have functions that accept as many arguments as you want, separated by commas. So our add function is going to accept two arguments called num1 and num2. So we'll add our colon, and there's our function definition. So we could have gone on and on with, num3 and so on forever and ever. We want our add function to add number 1 and number 2. But before we go ahead and implement our function, we want to define a comment for what our function actually is supposed to do. And the way that's done in Python is with something called a docstring. So to create a docstring, simply type 3 quotation marks. 1, 2, 3. And after hitting it the third time, the IDE will automatically add the trailing 3 and correct that for you. We want to type returns num1 plus num2. Now this isn't actually code, this is just a comment that defines what we want our function to do. I could write one-stop programming is cool. And that's perfectly fine to write because it's just a comment and it's not actually executed. Note that this is also indented, and on the next line where we actually are going to define what our function does, that also needs to be indented, otherwise it won't be considered as part of the function. I'm going to introduce a new keyword called return. And what this keyword basically does is it allows the function to return a value, return a variable. This is what allows functions to take in arguments, do something to them, and then return a result. So in this case, we want to add number 1 and number 2. So we'll simply type num1 plus num2. And that's our function. This function is simply going to return the sum of num1 and num2. Now, I used the plus operator to indicate that I want to add number 1 and number 2. There's also the subtract operator, the multiply operator, and the divide operator, which are the subtract, multiply, and divide operators. So I'm not going to actually implement those functions quite yet, as those will be left for you guys to do on your own between this video and the next video. For the rest of this video, we're just going to dive into what all of this really means and how we can use it. It doesn't look like a lot. It's really only 2 lines of code with a comment, but it's really important to understand exactly what's going on here. So down here in our main function, let's call our add function a couple times, and let's make sure we print out the result so we can actually see what it's doing. So I'll type print add to call our function, and then our 2 arguments, which I'm just going to arbitrarily define as 1 and 1. So that will be one instance of this, and we can go ahead and run this at this point. So we can see that we got 2, which was our expected result because we're adding 1 plus 1. Let's just call a couple more just for fun. Just to make sure it works. 2 plus 4, and last but not least, let's do 10 plus 10. 3 print calls, 3 calls to our add function. So the expected result, so I'm also going to introduce so this is the comment for Docstring. There's also a single line comment, which is just the pound sign. So this should be expects 2. Expects 6. And we expect 20 here. Let's run our application. And we get to 620, which is exactly what we expected. Let's really dive into this now. What is this really doing if we were to step through it? Well, let's actually step through it. So if we go to Run, Debug, we can actually step through this program. If this pops up, we can allow the access there. It didn't actually do anything different, but that's because we didn't use a breakpoint. So if I'm going to click in the margin over here between the actual typing area and the line numbers, and that should add this red dot, which is called a breakpoint. So now when I click the debug button, which is now a little bug, which if this is a play button, it's not going to be in debug mode, and if it's this bug, it will be in debug mode. And if you ever need to change that, you just go up to Run and Run versus Debug. So we're going to debug. And now notice that we get this new window down here that's the debugging window. And we have all these controls, but for now, we're just going to use these two, which are step to the next line in this file, or step over, and step to the next line executed, also known as step into. So let's do a step into. And we're going to step into our add function. And we can actually see the value of num1 and num2 in the debugger here. And now we can just do step over, and then step over again, and then if we click on the console tab, we'll see that we printed 2. On the next one, let's just use step into. So we step into again, we see that we passed in 2 and 4. Step into again, there's nothing to step into because it can just execute this. Step into again, and we get 6. And let's just step over to the last one, and we get 20. And then to finish up, we can click the play button, and our process will end. So the debugger is really powerful. We'll be using it a lot in later videos, but that was just a quick introduction. So now let's get down to what this is actually doing in a more of a line-by-line, life as a computer standpoint. On this first line, we add 1 plus 1, but we're calling it through our add function. So we go up here to line 3 on our add function, and we can imagine that this num1 becomes 1, and this num2 becomes 1. So then the computer sees this, and it's going to evaluate 1 plus 1, which obviously is 2. So then it's going to return 2. So at this point, we're done up here. We then come down here, and since we return the value 2, this whole call of the function just becomes 2. So we simplified that to print 2, which is exactly what happens. So let me just undo all of those changes real fast. This is just, if we remember from the last video, print is just a function itself that takes an argument that it prints to the console. But let's say instead of printing the result of 1 plus 1, we wanted to save it. So I'm going to get rid of our other 2 calls here, and I'm going to get rid of the print statement on our 1 plus 1. And I'm just going to say my result equals add 1 comma 1. Now what this is going to do is this is going to create a new variable called my result, just like we had in the last video where we had my first variable equal hello world, except instead of a constant string of hello world, we've got the result of the function from calling 1 plus 1. So now what we can do is we can print my result and run that, or debug rather. So we'll enter the debugger, and we will step into, and we'll see that, oh, I didn't actually change these to num1 and num2, but I can go ahead and change it before it executes the code while it's running. And now it will work as intended, and we can see by scrolling over it that that's num1 and that's num2. So now we return from that, step over, and now we can see right here that my result is 2. And we can see that down here in the variables window as well. And then when we print out, we'll see that we print 2. So that's all we're going to cover in this video. I encourage you to go ahead and implement the subtract, multiply, and divide functions on your own, just like we implemented the add function here. Remember to include your docstring comment so you remember what your function's doing later. In the next video, we're going to cover user input so we can build out our calculator application to accept input from the user. I'm also going to introduce the concept of variable types and how to manage variable types effectively. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm Kevin from kjdElectronics, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.